Dubrow Suspicion Files.
Okay, let's dive in. We're going to start this deep dive not with a question, but with a bizarre, completely true, and just utterly strange fact. It sounds like a glitch in reality. You ready for this?
I am, and I think a lot of people think they know the story of Standard Time, but they really have no idea how weird the transition actually was.
Right. So on Sunday, November 18th, 1883, in dozens and dozens of American cities, noon happened twice.
Twice?
Yeah. Church bells would ring out for 12 o'clock, you know, the traditional midday. People would look at their watches. And then just minutes later, those exact same bells would ring again for 12 o'clock a second time. This was literally called the Day of Two Noons.
It's such a fantastic image, isn't it? A kind of temporal reset button being pushed across the entire nation all at once.
But this wasn't an act of government. It wasn't some public consensus.
No, this was, at its core, a national crisis that was orchestrated and then executed entirely by private corporations, specifically the American railroad industry.
And that's the real tension we're digging into today. Our mission here is to explore the absolute chaos that came before this moment and then really analyze how the railroads pulled off what was essentially a corporate coup. They seized control of time itself.
Exactly. And we need to get past the simple story of, oh, it was for convenience.
Right.
This deep dive is really about the existential struggle between local tradition, what people back then literally called God's time, and the brutal, efficient, and often deadly demands of the new industrial age. That became railroad time.
So the stakes weren't just convenience.
Not at all. The stakes were survival. If the railroads couldn't standardize time, they couldn't run their schedules safely, and people would just keep dying in horrific wrecks.
It's this incredible battle between hundreds of local versions of reality and one brutal, non-negotiable need for continental precision. So, okay, let's start there. What did life actually look like before November 18th, 1883? What was this world of local time?
To really get it, you have to sort of mentally transport yourself back to a world where time isn't a global kept thing. It was just observed locally.
And when you say observed, you mean they were using the highest authority they had, which was the sun.
Exactly. Noon was defined as the precise moment the sun hit its zenith, its highest point, in your local sky. Historians call this mean local time, or more simply, sun time.
So every single community, every town had its own time based purely on its longitude.
Precisely. If you walked, say, 50 miles east, the sun would peak at a different moment. So noon was different. The town's main clock, maybe in a church steeple or a jeweler's window, was the official timekeeper for everyone in that town.
And for most of human history, that worked perfectly fine. I mean, if you're a farmer or you run a local shop, you don't need to know the time 200 miles away.
Right. You just needed to know when to plant, when to close up for the day, when to go to church. It was a perfectly functional system. But then the railroads came.
And they started weaving this complex web across thousands of miles, connecting everything. And that hyperlocal tradition just became a logistical impossibility.
The scale of the chaos this created is, not exaggerating, genuinely staggering. It's the foundation of this entire story. The United States in the 1870s did not have 4 time zones.
No, it had hundreds.
Hundreds. Some reports suggest over 300 different official local times. Others confirm at least 144 in North America alone.
300 different times. Just try to imagine running a business, a supply chain, or, God forbid, a national railroad network, when every single town you pass through has its own clock.
It wasn't just annoying. It was paralyzing.
Do we have specific examples?
Oh, yeah. We have concrete examples of the administrative nightmare. The Midwest was ground zero for the confusion because all the major lines converged there.
Yeah.
Get this. Wisconsin was dealing with 38 different local times.
38 in one state.
Michigan had 27. And Indiana, which was a critical junction for east-west traffic, had to manage 23 different competing local time standards.
How did anyone even buy a ticket or figure out a transfer? It sounds like you'd have to pull out a conversion chart every time you stop for a cup of coffee.
You basically had to be a constant mathematician. And this burden fell on the traveler and, most importantly, on the railroad scheduler. Think about the actual time differences. The sources are full of them. When it was exactly 12:00 p.m. in Chicago, that same moment was 12:07 p.m. in Indianapolis, 7 minutes ahead. But in St. Louis, it was 11:50 a.m., 10 minutes behind.
Wow. So you could take a short train ride and literally go back in time.
Exactly. There's a great anecdote about a 20-mile train ride that could send a traveler 10 minutes into the past, according to the local clocks. It completely messed with your sense of reality.
And if it was that weird for a passenger, what was it like for the railroad manager?
A living hell. I mean, they weren't managing one single timetable. They were trying to juggle separate schedules that contradicted each other every time a train crossed a county line.
So even within one company.
Oh, yeah. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad had to operate using 3 completely separate local times on its own lines: Baltimore time, Columbus time, and Vincennes time. The Pennsylvania Railroad was just as bad. They used their own Philadelphia time, which was 5 minutes slower than New York time, but 5 minutes faster than Baltimore time.
It's like a logic puzzle from hell. You have these internal corporate time systems fighting with external local sun time systems, and all of them are fighting with the next town's clock.
It's less a system and more just competitive chaos.
And the train stations were the physical embodiment of this.
Perfectly put. These grand terminals, which were supposed to be symbols of progress and order, became what one newspaper at the time called temples of confusion.
I love that phrase. So you walk into this beautiful building and you just see
Walls covered in clocks, not 2 or 4, sometimes dozens of clocks, each one showing a different time. There'd be one for the local city sun time, one for the Pennsylvania line, one for the B&O, one for the time in the next state over. It was a visual representation of the system breaking down.
So this wasn't just annoying or confusing. I mean, it was definitely both of those things. But this level of systemic chaos meant the stakes were getting much, much higher. It was moving from inconvenience to catastrophe.
Absolutely. The conversation very quickly shifts from logistics to mortality, because the railroads introduced this new, non-negotiable reality that demanded absolute, unyielding precision. And that was the printed timetable.
Right. The timetable wasn't a suggestion. It was a sacred text, the foundation of all safety in the industry.
It was. And the critical technical detail you have to remember is that most railroad lines back then were single tracks.
Just one track for trains going in both directions.
Exactly. So if you have 2 engineers driving trains toward each other on the same track, they must know precisely when and where to expect the other train. This led to the creation of meets and passes at sidings, which are short parallel tracks.
And the timetable was the only thing keeping them from hitting each other head-on.
Provided both engineers agreed on the time. The schedule demanded that Engineer A's 12:05 p.m. was the exact same moment as Engineer B's 12:05 p.m. And with hundreds of local sun times, that was impossible to guarantee.
The system was basically designed for failure.
And it failed, horribly. We see records showing 97 major railroad wrecks between 1831 and 1853 alone. The first one directly blamed on a timing error was back in 1841. But the moment that really crystallized the deadly danger of this whole mess was the Valley Falls tragedy.
Let's focus on that because this really brings home the human cost. We're in Valley Falls, Rhode Island, August 12, 1853. This is way before the big standardization push, but it proves why that push was so necessary.
So picture the scene. You have a conductor on a southbound excursion train. He knows he has to pull onto a siding to let the northbound express pass. It's a standard procedure.
He checks the timetable.
And checks the timetable, which is set to a central railroad standard, not the local sun time. He calculates he needs 5 full minutes to get his train safely onto the siding and clear the main track.
Okay, 5 minutes. So he looks at his watch.
He looks at his watch, which is set to the local time he's used to. And his watch says he has 4 minutes. Not 5. 4.
Close, but not quite.
And this is that fatal moment of human calculation inside a broken system. He thinks, 4 minutes? It's close enough. Maybe the other train's a bit late. Maybe he just trusts his own watch more. He gives the signal to proceed.
But he was wrong. He was off by that one crucial minute, the exact difference between his local watch and the central time the other train was running on.
The result was a horrific, unavoidable, head-on collision. The cost was immediate and brutal. 14 people were killed. 17 more were seriously injured.
14 lives for 1 minute of time difference.
Yes. That crash solidified a horrifying truth for the whole industry. The technology of the trains, the speed, the distance had completely outpaced the technology of timekeeping. The motive to act was now written in blood on the tracks. And the thing is, the problem was known. People were offering solutions, but the industry just resisted any fix that didn't come from within its own range.
Right. This is where we have to talk about Charles F. Dowd. The school principal. He had the right idea, but he had the wrong job title.
That's a perfect way to put it. Dowd, out of Saratoga Springs, New York, proposed the idea of time zones way back in 1870. This was the fundamental solution the railroads eventually used, but they just ignored him.
Why? Because he was an outsider.
Purely. It was bureaucratic and cultural. He was an academic, an educator. He presented his detailed plan to Congress, to the railroads, and they just dismissed it. They couldn't stomach the idea that a school principal might understand their own business better than they did.
So they needed an insider.
They needed an insider. And that man was William F. Allen. Allen wasn't just some railroad executive. He was the secretary of the General Time Convention, the main coordinating body for the whole industry. But his most important role, the one that gave him this unmatched, intimate knowledge of the chaos.
He was the editor of the big schedule book.
Exactly. The Traveler's Official Railway Guide. A massive phone book-sized guide with every single train schedule in North America. He literally saw the hundreds of conflicting times laid out on the page every single day. He lived and breathed the chaos.
So when Allen finally acts, you'd think it was just based on the pure logic of his plan. But it wasn't that simple. This is where the political context of the Gilded Age really comes in. The railroads weren't just motivated by logic.
No, they were motivated by profound corporate fear.
Fear of what?
Fear of the government. You have to remember the era. The 1880s were full of public anger towards railroad monopolies. Farmers, businessmen, they were all demanding regulation, protesting predatory pricing. The pressure on the federal government to step in was immense.
And it wasn't just public pressure. Scientists were getting involved, too.
Yes, the scientific community, led by figures like the meteorologist Cleveland Abbey, was demanding standard time for its own reasons. Abbey needed it for accurate weather forecasting. You can't track a storm system across the country if every town has its own time.
So the railroads saw the writing on the wall.
They absolutely did. They realized if they didn't solve this crisis themselves, and quickly, the federal government would step in and do it for them. And they feared a government-imposed system, one that might hurt their profits, far more than they feared the existing chaos.
So this was a preemptive strike, a hostile takeover of time itself, designed to seize control of national policy before Congress could act.
It was a corporate coup. And the setting for this coup was the Grand Pacific Hotel in Chicago, October 11th, 1883. The General Time Convention meets. It is exclusively railroad officials.
No government, no public oversight, no school principals.
This is a private meeting to decide a public national standard. Allen stands up and lays out his plan. 4 zones for the entire United States: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific.
All based on meridians west of Greenwich.
And that detail is critical. Tying it to Greenwich, the established international maritime standard, was brilliant. It prevented any infighting over which American city's time should be the standard. It gave it an external scientific neutrality.
So the plan was that all railroad clocks on all lines would switch to this new railroad time at the exact same moment nationwide.
The vote was taken. The ayes were overwhelming. The date was set, Sunday, November 18th, 1883. The railroads had just declared their sovereignty over the nation's clocks. So you would think, right, that such a logical, safety-focused plan would be immediately embraced by the federal government.
You would think. I mean, train wrecks were expensive and deadly.
But the U.S. government's response was one of staunch institutional fury.
It's amazing how fast they pushed back. The U.S. Attorney General issued an immediate legal opinion, and he declared railroad time to be illegal.
Illegal and unconstitutional. The government saw this as a massive overreach of private corporate power. The argument was basically that only Congress could regulate something like this.
So no federal departments were allowed to use it.
That's right. He ordered that no part of the federal government could operate on this new standard. And they stuck to it. For decades, the government clocks in Washington, D.C. stayed on their own local sun time, which was 7 minutes different from the new Eastern Standard Time.
They held out for 35 years.
35 years. But the railroads had the one thing that mattered more than government approval: operational control. They knew they didn't need Washington's permission. They just needed the public to cooperate.
So they essentially told the government, watch us. And then they launched a massive PR campaign to win over the cities and the people.
And they used the new technology of the era to do it. The telegraph. They went directly to city councils, to major businesses, convincing them to adopt the standard. And they armed the press.
How so?
For days leading up to the change, they sent detailed maps and instructions to every major newspaper. The papers printed these complex diagrams showing citizens exactly how to adjust their watches. Add 2 minutes here, subtract 10 minutes there.
And they got the scientific authorities on board to give it legitimacy.
Crucially, They enlisted the U.S. Naval Observatory and the Allegheny Observatory to provide the single authoritative time signal, the tick, that would synchronize the entire system. It gave the whole operation a veneer of objective scientific truth.
This brings us to the actual mechanism of the change, the literal physical act of stopping and restarting time.
It was mostly handled by the Western Union Telegraph Company, which basically became the arbiter of the new standard through its subsidiary, the Time Telegraph Company.
And the most dramatic moment happened in New York City, the hub for the Eastern time zone change.
It did. Morning of November 18th, 1883, it's 9 a.m., we're in room 48 of the Western Union Telegraph Building. And the man in charge is James Hamlet, the general superintendent of the Time Telegraph Company.
And he's standing in front of the master clock, the heart of New York's time.
The absolute heart, this massive pendulum clock whose signal was telegraphed to thousands of jewelers, banks, and shops across the whole region.
And at exactly 9 a.m. local time.
Hamlet reaches out and physically stops the heavy pendulum. The familiar ticking just ceases. For the next 3 minutes and 58.38 seconds, New York's official time was literally on hold. It was erased.
He was waiting for the new standard time to catch up.
He was. He was tracking it on a separate, hyper-accurate chronometer. That specific amount of time was the exact adjustment needed to shift New York from its old local time to the new Eastern Standard Time. When the wait was over, he just set the pendulum back in motion. And just like that, New York was synchronized.
And this same act was happening in other cities all over the country. What was it like for the average person on the street?
It was the only thing anyone was talking about. For weeks, the papers had been preparing people. The most common greeting on the street that Sunday was, "Have you the new time?"
People are fascinated.
Completely. They were standing in crowds outside jewelers' windows, watching the men inside physically move the hands of the clocks. It felt both deeply strange and totally inevitable.
And then came the moment that gave the day its name, the 2 noons.
Yes. As the sun reached its highest point over Manhattan, the bells at St. Paul's Chapel rang 12 times. That was the old sun time, the traditional noon.
Then there was a pause.
A pause. People waited, watches in hand, and then exactly 4 minutes later, the bells rang again. 12 chimes for the new railroad noon. The corporate coup, orchestrated by telegraph wire, was complete.
So if the railroads were expecting a big thank you from the public for this seamless synchronization, they were very, very wrong.
They were severely mistaken. The public reaction was immediate, it was strong, and by all contemporary accounts, it was belligerent.
And the issue wasn't really logistical, was it? It was ideological.
Entirely. People felt that these giant corporations were dictating the rhythm of their personal lives. They felt their right to tell time by the sun, what they called God's time, was being stolen from them and replaced with this artificial industrial railroad time.
And you see this philosophical outrage perfectly in the newspapers of the day. The Indianapolis Sentinel was absolutely livid.
Their editorial just captured the public's fear perfectly. They wrote, "The Railroad Convention has taken charge of the time business."
You can just feel the indignation.
And they really leaned into the arrogance of it, writing that from now on people would have to eat, sleep, work, marry, and ministers will be required to preach by railroad time. The terror was the complete corporate colonization of daily life.
They even had that sarcastic line about the sun and moon.
Right, that they might try to ignore the new orders, but ultimately, they too will have to give in. It was seen as the height of human arrogance.
And this wasn't just talk. The resistance became physical. And nowhere was it more intense, or frankly more absurd, than in Bangor, Maine.
Ah, yes. Mayor Frederick Cummings. He became the face of the traditionalist holdouts.
He didn't just disagree with it.
No. He called the new standard unconstitutional, just like the Attorney General, but then he vetoed the City Council's decision to adopt standard time.
And his reasoning was explicitly religious.
Deeply. He wrote that it violated one of the immutable laws of God. He basically said, "I do not believe that any municipal regulation or railroad laws have power to change it." He was completely defiant. And then he threatened to arrest anyone who dared to touch the public clocks.
Arrest them for changing a clock.
For changing a clock. He was not kidding.
Yeah.
But the railroads had already won the economic war.
Right. Business had to go on.
So 2 of the churches in Bangor defied him and changed their clocks to the new Eastern Standard Time anyway. The other 2 public clocks remained on what everyone started calling Cummings time, which was 25 minutes ahead of the new standard.
So Bangor, Maine was a city literally split in time.
A daily reminder of the conflict. And this resistance wasn't just in Maine. We saw pockets of it all over. Detroit is the most famous holdout. They didn't give in until 1905.
And Detroit was especially confusing, right, because of its geography.
It was a total mess. Detroit is geographically much further west than most of the Eastern time zone. It's true. Solar time is actually very close to the middle of the Central time zone.
So when the country standardized, they were put in Eastern time.
But the local businesses all preferred Central time because it was closer to their solar noon. So for years, Detroit existed in this state of temporal schizophrenia. Some people used the official Eastern time, others clung to the old Central standard. It was just chaos for deliveries, appointments, everything.
But at the end of the day, the railroads won.
They won through sheer practical necessity. They controlled commerce. If you wanted your goods delivered, you had to use their schedule. It was that simple.
And the last holdout, the federal government itself, finally caved, but only under extreme duress.
35 long years. It wasn't until 1918, in the middle of World War I, that Congress finally passed the Standard Time Act.
And it was because of the war.
It was. The government needed to implement daylight saving time to save energy for the war effort. And to do that, they first needed a unified national time system. So they were forced, after all that resistance, to adopt the exact system the railroads had imposed back in 1883. Railroad time finally became the law of the land.
It's just a defining example of corporate power creating national policy just by controlling the essential infrastructure and forcing the government to catch up decades later.
So we've gone through the chaos, the corporate coup, the day of two noons, and then the slow, reluctant acceptance by the public and the government. The logical conclusion here is that the railroads solved their problem.
Right. They imposed their standard, and the deadly timing error wrecks must have stopped immediately.
And that would make for a very neat and tidy historical narrative. But as we've been hinting, this is where the story takes its sharpest, and I think its most crucial, twist. The day of two noons failed to create safety.
Ow.
It only standardized the zones. It did nothing to standardize the actual practice of timekeeping.
So we jump forward in time.
We jump forward 8 years after the new standard was adopted, to April 18th, 1891. A small town called Kipton, Ohio.
8 years of standard time, synchronized zones, printed timetables, everything should be working.
It should be. But disaster struck again. And this crash proved that the initial fix was tragically incomplete.
So what happened at Kipton?
You have a fast mail train racing east, and the Toledo Express, a passenger train heading west, same single track. They're in the same time zone, using the same synchronized timetable. The system is working as designed.
The schedule says the Toledo Express has to pull over onto a siding at Kipton to let the mail train pass.
Exactly. The mail train has priority. So the engineer of the Express checks his watch, a watch that is, in theory, synchronized with the national standard.
And he thinks he has enough time?
He calculates his position and his speed, and he believes he has a clear 7 minutes to get to the siding and pull off the main track. Plenty of time. So he proceeds.
But he was wrong.
He was tragically wrong.
Yeah.
The terrible reality was that his watch had stopped for 4 minutes earlier in the day. Maybe it got bumped. Maybe some dust got in the works. It stopped, and then without him ever noticing, it restarted. 4 minutes slow.
So he didn't have 7 minutes. He had 3.
He had 3. The entire margin for safety was gone, wiped out by one faulty piece of personal equipment.
And there's another layer to this tragedy, another human element.
There is. The conductor on the Express, who later admitted under investigation that he had a perfectly good working watch in his own pocket, never looked at it.
Why not?
He just trusted the engineer. He trusted the new, supposedly foolproof system. He had ceded his own personal authority over time to the engineer's broken watch.
And the trains hit head-on.
At high speed. Both engineers were killed instantly. And horrifically, 9 postal clerks who work in the wooden mail cars right behind the engine were burned alive in the fire that followed.
The source is called the Kipton Crash, a monument to the failure of standard time.
Because it was. It proved that standardizing the zone was only half the solution. It addressed the geographical problem, but it completely ignored the mechanical problem of the individual timepiece. They had standardized time on paper, but not in the pockets of the workers.
This had to have been a massive wake-up call for the industry.
A shocking one. They were already facing huge legal liabilities from wrecks. They finally realized the problem wasn't the schedule itself. It was the total lack of quality control for the workers' watches. They had to create a new layer of control over the workers themselves.
And this is where the jeweler, Webb C. Ball, comes in.
Yes. They appointed him to investigate the disaster and create a real solution. Ball's investigation was forensic. He found that railroad employees were using all sorts of unreliable, cheap watches that could be off by several minutes a day.
So Ball's solution was to standardize the watch itself.
It was revolutionary. He created the General Railroad's timepiece standards, which everyone quickly started calling the railroad grade watch standard. This is the first time a corporation mandated personal, high-precision timekeeping on such a massive scale.
And the requirements were strict.
Incredibly strict. First, a railroad grade watch had to be accurate to within a staggering 30 seconds a week, a huge leap in reliability. Second, it had to be regularly inspected and certified by one of Ball's official inspectors.
And there was a third critical safety feature.
The lever set mechanism. This meant you couldn't change the time just by pulling out the crown, which was common and led to accidental changes. You had to physically open the watch case and use a tiny lever. It forced intentionality.
This was the final step, the ultimate victory of corporate precision. The railroads didn't just have to hijack the sun, they had to hijack the watches in every single worker's pocket.
The Kipton Crash, 8 years after the Day of Two Noons, was the final bloody lesson that forced the industry not just to standardize time, but to enforce precision itself.
It's really a remarkable arc when you lay it all out like that, from the total chaos of 300 different local times
Through a swift corporate takeover that was fiercely resisted by the public and the government.
to the final necessary realization that standardizing the zones was completely useless if you didn't also standardize the tool in the worker's hand.
And those standards that Webb C. Ball created, they became the gold standard for timekeeping quality for a whole generation. That level of precision, forced on an entire class of workers by corporate regulation, is the real legacy here.
And it connects directly to today. The precision that we all just take for granted now. Your phone's syncing perfectly to an atomic clock, which syncs to an observatory. That's a direct descendant of the railroad standards.
We are all, in a very real sense, still living on railroad time.
And I love that the phrase "getting on the ball" is often directly attributed to this, to meeting Webb C. Ball's rigorous standards. It literally means getting your watch or your act in order.
It's just a testament to the sheer audacity of those railroad officials back in 1883. They saw that the new industrial age demanded a collective surrender of our personal autonomy over time.
They forced the entire nation to trade its local traditions, its observation of the sun, for continental synchronization and safety.
Which really raises an important question for us to think about, even today, when time is invisible and just flows through fiber optic cables. The railroads fought to control time to save their profits and prevent wrecks, sure, but in doing so, they inadvertently gave the whole nation a higher, uniform definition of what accuracy even means.
So we have to ask ourselves, was the standardization of time just a matter of logistics? Or was it something more profound? Was it the moment that we, as a society, collectively agreed to trade our personal, local autonomy over our clocks for collective safety and continental efficiency?
And what does it mean that that foundational agreement was imposed by corporate fiat, not by democratic consensus? That's a trade-off, that tension, that continues to define the rhythms of our modern world.